please introduce yourself first?
All right, so yes, so I'm Leslie Weir. I'm the librarian and archivist of Canada.
Okay. So, Leslie, could you please tell us about the libraries in your country? How do you imagine the modern library? What is it?
Well, first of all, I think you have to know that Canada has about 37 million people. And like Russia, we're quite a large country. So from coast to coast, it's 6,521 kilometers. We have 10 provinces and 3 territories. And in Canada, we have about 600 public library systems with 3,000 library branches. And we have about 8 library schools that train about 1,500 new librarians and archivists a year. And to be a librarian in Canada, you need to go to an American Library Association accredited library school. So that gives you a little bit of background.
American, right?
American in Canada, yes.
Yeah.
It's a North American approach so that we can easily have professionals move across the border, and seems to work fairly well for us. So in Canada, the public libraries they follow what's called a community-led model. So they are really integrated into their local community, and they want their library to reflect the needs of the people that live in their towns and villages and cities. And that actually means that when we recruit librarians, we're very interested in their technical skills, but we're equally interested in their empathy and their social skills, because a lot is about the programming we develop to attract librarians, to attract the people into the libraries. We put a lot of emphasis on youth, on the elderly, on people with disabilities, on new Canadians, because we have a lot of immigration into Canada, and each of those groups have different needs, and the libraries try to meet all of those different needs. And they often cooperate with the other social services in their area. That could be the health services, it could be the sports services, it could be other cultural services, so that they work together and plan programming together often. So in Canada also, we have a very large Indigenous population. So we have a lot of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And so we put quite an emphasis in trying to ensure that there are good public library services in their areas, because they're quite remote often and may be living in very isolated communities. And I think Russia may have some of those kind of communities as well.
But are these the libraries different a little bit to the libraries in the central part of this?
Yes,
Do they
especially.
have some special requirements?
That's right. Well, in our Indigenous communities, they're really becoming a key part of trying to ensure that their culture thrives and is healthy, and that they're maintaining their native languages. So the public library.
Courses
So they may have courses in the native Indigenous language, and teach the young children. They bring the elders in so that the children can speak to people who still speak their native language, and they may record people, and then share those recordings and have people's stories that are available in their libraries, so that their communities can be proud of their heritage and can ensure that the youth know about it and have an opportunity to engage with their communities. So it's quite an important role. Of course, collections are key to libraries. So all of our public libraries try to work to have up-to-date and modern collections where they have lots of print books and magazines, but that they also have good access to the electronic collections, to the large databases. We have a huge interest in Canada in genealogy, so learning about the history of your family. And so a lot of public libraries put a focus on supporting their citizens to be able to trace their families. They want to know if they came from Russia originally, and when they came over to Canada, because we are a land of immigrants, except for our Indigenous people. So the public libraries play a big role there. We also look at the library of things, as we call it. So this is where libraries actually lend things to their library patrons. So I can give you an example. Elliott Lake is it's in an area that has a lot of lakes and a lot of forest. There are a lot of people who enjoy fishing and hunting, and so the Elliott Public Lake Library actually lends fishing tackle, so fishing rods and the materials you need to fish, so that people who don't have them can borrow them and go out into the community. We also have the Marathon Public Library. They have a large elderly population, so they've developed classes and iPads and other technology tablets that they can borrow. So first they can have a class on how to use it, and then they can borrow it to try it and see if they like it, and then they can decide later if they might, if they're able, if they might like to be able to buy one. We have, for instance, the Grimsby Public Library. It's in farmland, so the people who are using it are farmers and farmers' children, and so they have a seed library so that you can borrow seeds to be able to plant.
How do you return the seeds?
The seeds, well, we'll have to talk to the Grimsby Public Library to find out, but you know, once you grow things, you can harvest the seeds.
Yeah.
You know, and we have all kinds of different examples where, you know, if you're in an area that's about mining, then you have things that relate to mining. If you're in an area that's doing car manufacturing, then maybe you have a collection about historic cars, and you might have, you know, the plans for that they used to build cars back in 1910, or you know, and then of course we do have our as I mentioned, our First Nations libraries that will maybe gather artifacts of the community, so that the community members, and they of course borrow them because they wouldn't, the library actually borrows them from the community members, so that the other members of the community can see those artifacts and enjoy them and understand the stories behind them. For instance, the Ottawa Public Library lends out musical instruments, because not everyone can afford to buy a musical instrument. But we don't ignore reading. We have a huge program in Canada called the TD Summer Reading Program. TD is a bank, and they have partnered with the Toronto Public Library and Libraries and Archives Canada to create, in our school year ends in June and starts again in September, which reflects our agricultural history, because people would take off the summer to be able to plant crops and farm, and their children were out in the fields. It's very changed now, but we have this TD Summer Reading Program because sometimes over the summer children lose their reading ability because they're not in school and they may not have books in their home. So we have 2,200 of our public library branches participate in this reading program, and they set a theme, and the kids read books, and they vote for their favorite themes, and you know, they have the kids come in and read in the library, or they come in and talk about the books. We also have something called the Forest of Reading Festival of Trees, where we partner with the book publishers and the school boards, and so we have all of these different age groups. So we have the silver maple is one age group, the red maple is another age group, the tamarack, which is another tree, is another age group, and we have a series of age groups, and then we also have one stream for the French language publications. And what happens is we pick 10 books for each age group, and in French. And then the schools partner to bring those books into the schools through their library. And then the kids all read those books, and they vote on which is their favorite book. And then in May, they have school trips, and they go to a large city in their area, the largest one being in Toronto, which is our largest city, and the authors come,
Oh.
and they get to have workshops and meet the authors and talk to them. And if they want to be an author, they can say, well, how did you become an author? How do you write a book? Where do you get your ideas? And then the kids get to debate which was the best book and why they liked it. And then they actually award the winner for each, like they have a book that wins in each category, and they go into a large theater, and the kids are all there in the theater, and they're from, you know, the youngest age children, 3 or 4 years old, to 18-year-old kids. And then the authors march in, and each author has 2 children with them. They have a child who's holding up a poster of the cover of their book, and they have a child who's actually going to say why their book is the best. So then you start with the youngest kids, and you have a 4-year-old get up in front of thousands of people and say, this book is the best book. You should vote for this book. And this is why it's the best book. And then we announce who's won. And it's like being at a rock concert. These authors are like rock stars. Everyone is chanting their name. They're screaming the book title, and they're just so excited. And they spend the whole day there. So it's quite an event, and there are tens of thousands of children involved in that.
It's quite nice because their thoughts about the book are changing because of this situation. It's not something boring. You can discuss this and you can vote.
Exactly. And the booksellers are all there, so if you hear about a great book, you can go right over and you can buy it there, discounted price for the festival. So we put a big emphasis on reading, on literacy. We make sure we have activities in the libraries that relate to that. But then we also look at the community and see what other kinds of activities would really serve that community. And in some cases, it might be yoga in the library, or it might be an after-school program to ensure that where children's parents are at work until later in the day, that they may not want to be alone. Maybe they want to go and learn to read, or maybe they want to learn to knit, or maybe they'd like to play a video game. And we try to ensure that the library has programs for all kinds of different people, different times of the day, and that they have spaces that really are welcoming and that aren't storage spaces for books, but are activity spaces for people.
I have 2 questions. The first one, how do you decide what kind of library should be in this area? How does it happen? So just the people are coming and everybody's voting, or you make some research? For example, how do you always find the space? Because sometimes the librarians have one opinion and the readers have the other opinion.
Definitely,
There should
definitely.
be one, or I don't know, 2 who decide.
So we've moved into a model that's called user experience design, sometimes called UX design. And so we really look at how we can engage with the users. And we want to engage with the users who come into the library, but we want to engage with the people who don't come into the library so we know why they don't come into the library. We certainly do surveys. We also do consultations where we will put out a lot of information about upcoming opportunities. Come and talk to us. Sometimes we'll have pizza or coffee and cookies to try to make sure people do come. We'll also look at going out. If there's going to be an event, we might go to the schools, or we might go to an event that's being held by someone else where we know we're going to find people. I do know that in some libraries, I know of a library that actually has a bicycle built for 2, and staff go out and ride around the village and invite people to come over today because we're doing something in the library, and they might even wear a costume. to draw attention to them. Or they might set up a pop-up booth. If you're having an agricultural fair or if you're having a music festival in your town or village, they might set up a little pop-up booth and have some things from the library and have staff there to engage with people. So we try to find many different ways, and we involve people in our planning. So we reach out, we do a strategic plan for each library where they look at what they need to accomplish to support their community, but we bring in the people who are going to use the library to help the librarians decide on what they should do for the next year and over the next 3 years and the next 5 years. So we do formalize the process in terms of a formal planning process, and then we also decide how we're going to measure our success. So what statistics and metrics are we going to gather? And they can't just be numbers, because sometimes the stories are very important. What impact did that activity have on an isolated elderly person, who's really shut into their home and is feeling very lonely? So what impact did it have for them to be able to go to the public library and get together with other people and participate in the events? And then we need to take the information that we got and build that into modifying our plan for the next year to be sure that it continues to respond to the community interests and needs.
And who supports the libraries financially?
In Canada, the public libraries are supported by their municipality and by their province. So there's a certain amount of money that comes provincially and certain supports, perhaps in terms of things like internet access. And then the municipality makes a levy in when they gather their taxes from their residents, and part of that funding goes to the municipal library. As well, there are sometimes federal grants that you can apply for special things. Perhaps you're trying to increase the employment of younger people, and so the federal government might make grants for libraries to develop training programs to help people develop new skills to make them more employable. So that's another type of partnership that we do, and funding that the libraries receive.
And the librarians should be educated in ALA, and after that also within several years they also go to ALA, or how?
Ideally, librarians should have an accredited degree from one of our library schools, but sometimes it's very hard to be able to recruit people, especially if you're in a remote and rural community. So sometimes we do have library technicians as well, who might have a college diploma, or might even have learned by working in a library. And so while you might aspire to have professional librarians in every library, some of our libraries are very small, and some of them have more limited opening hours when they're very small, and they may have people who've been trained as well. Once you do get your training, whether it's a library, in Canada it's a master's degree for being a full librarian. But continuing professional development is extremely important. And so we have conferences. The largest one in Canada is called the Super Conference, which is held every January in Toronto, which is our largest city. And then each province also has a provincial library association, and they host a library conference in their province where they include a lot of professional development. And then we also have the development of webinars that are offered online by our library associations, sometimes by our libraries, and sometimes by vendors who are providing products to libraries. And so that when people can't travel, that they can get access to the professional development materials. We would like to be able to webcast a lot more of what goes on in our conferences, and that's something that we're looking at for the future. And we're very thrilled that IFLA is actually webcasting 6 of the sessions here, and one of them is a session I'm involved with, which is called, and I'm sure your librarians will think, oh, this is something quite interesting. They're looking at love stories in libraries.
Oh, I saw that session. Yeah.
So it's going to be a great session. Come to it, and if you can't come to it, it'll be available remotely for everyone. But it's looking at the role love plays in libraries.
Oh.
Librarians love their patrons. They love their people who come into their libraries. And sometimes their patrons meet their husband or wife in a library.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, people love books. People love the activities in their library. And so we're going to highlight all kinds of different love stories. And there's an opportunity actually to share love stories through the New Professionals website on Facebook. So, you know, it's a creative way to look at libraries and to bring people together to talk about libraries. And right now we're finding that what really resonates with people is stories, the stories about people. And that's really helping libraries get improved funding by highlighting stories where they actually talk about someone. They actually say, you know, this is Jill, and, you know, she's this age and she comes from this town, and this was her situation, and this is what a library did for her. And then people can see a face and they go, okay, there's a library user. Because if you say there's 20,000 library users, that's just a number.
Yeah,
What you want to do is put a face to each of those numbers.
That's true.
So.
You told that 20 years ago the situation was quite different, and your librarians in libraries were more like the libraries in Russia now. And how have you changed this? So how was it changed?
I think when we started to have the internet become very broadly available, which in Canada would be back around the year 2000, and they started talking about digital libraries and digital books, and they started saying, we won't need libraries. The libraries will be empty. There'll be no one in them because you'll be able to get everything on the internet. Everything will be digital. Well, the problem is in 2008, the amount of information created that 1 year equaled all of the information that was created by peoplekind in the history of the world. So the volume of information it's too great. There's too much information. People can't find what they need. And we also have research that shows that people absorb better when they read in print. So they actually are able to retain information and use it better when they read in print. So we need a mix of print and electronic. So then libraries realized that they had to be sure they were relevant for more than just providing a book. Even though a book is very important, they needed to be a hub in their community. And so they started looking at their spaces and saying, the spaces should focus on the people, not on the books. But the books should be there because we're a library. And then we should look at being sure that we can have access to the electronics and the digital, and that we can create events and activities in the library that bring the people in. And I can say now we have many, many more people. I don't have the statistics at hand, but millions more visits to the libraries in Canada now than we did when we were focused on lending books. So we've also created spaces for people to meet in libraries where if you have a club that would like to have a space to meet, come to the library, do it in the library. And then you can use the library while you're there, but your group can have a room to meet in. You know, they can access the internet, they can, you know, have interactions with the other people in the library. They can hold events there where they can invite people to come, and that it really does become that community hub. And that has happened over time in Canada, but now I would say that our public libraries are really based on that, on being community-led, in their communities, for their communities, but bringing together the books and the digital and the activities and the space.
Over these 20 years, have the librarians got used to this situation? Because sometimes it's quite difficult to move from the situation when I'm caring about the book, but now I should care about the people. So it's quite different
Yes.
model, and it's quite difficult to got this empathy skills. And
That's right,
so
that's
on.
right.
So how have you trained them, or
It's-
how have
yes.
they changed?
It has been an evolution over time. It's all about the culture of librarians, and culture doesn't change in a year or in 5 years even. It evolves over time, and it changes too as you bring new people into the profession, and as the people in the profession have opportunities to be able to have more training and to be able to debate and discuss how they feel about those changes, and to look at which ones are good for their community, but in listening to their users, not just in deciding what they think their users need. So we have really tried to integrate that into the education at our schools of information studies, information and library studies. And we have also looked at who we recruit to become librarians. You know, I mean, the first thing traditional librarians say is, I love to read.
Yeah.
I love books. And that's important. But we're now looking for people to become librarians who think first, I love people. I like to bring people together. I like to create learning experiences for people. I like to be able to find the right book for this person and, you know, to help them. So it just becomes very important to shift your focus to your users and what they need in terms of books and reading and other activities. And then also maybe being able to create debates and discussions. If you're in a larger library, then your team can get together and talk about it. And you can listen also, because we have different generations of librarians. You know, we have what we call, I don't know the terms you use in Russia, but we have what we call the baby boomers, so the people who were born just after World War II. And then we have the millennials, who were born, you know, in the lead up to about 1978, 79, I think, in there. And then we have the Gen X. So we have these different generations, and each generation has a different set of personalities and characteristics. And I mean, we shouldn't be stereotypical and just think a whole generation is all the same. But different things satisfy them, and working in different ways are important to them. So now we see a lot more collaboration and discussion and making decision, sometimes by consensus, and sometimes it has to be decided by whoever is the leader. But you want to engage everyone in your library, all the staff, in those discussions and involve them in how you see your library changing and developing. And it's really important to manage that change. And you can't just tell people to do something and make them do it. They need to believe in it. And if work isn't fun and they don't love it, then the people who use their libraries aren't going to have fun and love it.
Yeah.
So you have to start with the librarians and with their team members and create an exciting environment that makes them feel good and that they enjoy being in. And I think you start with small steps, and then you create almost a tidal wave, because when people see the success with beautiful new spaces that really respond to what the people in the community are looking for, and they come into the library and they see that they can do different things in those spaces, then the librarians will be excited, and they'll start imagining what they can do, and it'll be wonderful.
Yeah. And do you evaluate somehow? You told me that the numbers are not the main thing. Of course, we agree, but the country is large, and there are so many libraries. Do you try to evaluate somehow the results and understand this library is not going good, we should help them, or in our country sometimes they are even closing because
We've had
there are no people,
yeah.
or
We have had libraries close, and can I just say to you, we have 3 provinces that where the provincial government decided to quite radically cut the support to libraries: Newfoundland, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. And because of our model of public libraries, where the communities are so engaged, the communities rose up and they refused to allow the government to cut the funding. And they refused to allow them to close libraries because they said, this library is making our community a good place to live. It is helping us have good, better citizens, and it is helping us have healthier and happier people. So we won't let you close the libraries. So yes, numbers are important. You want to be sure that your libraries are being used, so you need your statistics of how many people are coming in, how many people are attending your events, how many people are borrowing books, how much use your electronic resources are getting. But then you also need to look at what impact do you have a higher level of literacy in your community because you have the library supporting the schools and working together to create a reading culture and an environment. And then you need to look at, are your citizens more healthy because they have better information about nutrition, because they understand the importance of exercise, because they see people exercising, not just in a gym or somewhere hidden, but in the middle of the community. And so if you gather those kinds of information, and you can look at the economic impact that your library has on your city, because libraries do have economic impact. Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, sounds like fantasy.
Now, fantasy.
But
Our
yeah,
libraries are not all as well funded. I mean, they do have funding challenges as well, because in every community there are many priorities. Maybe you need to build a new sports facility, or in Canada, a hockey rink, or maybe there could be so many things that your community may need, and libraries are always competing for funding.
yeah. The main thing to understand what is needed here in this place, and to provide your society, your community with this. So, have I understood right? Yeah.
You've understood right. It's extremely important that the library be based in the community, and that it be community-led, and that the librarians are very much part of the community network that serves the community. Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. We got a lot of useful information. And if you don't mind, could you please wish something to our librarians? Just a simple wish to the librarians who are willing to come to our project and modernize their library and to bring something new.
Wow. Yes, all right. Everything out of the way. Well, I wish your librarians huge success with their modernization, and I am sure that as the libraries modernize, the people will come, and they will be true centers of their community, and they will be leaders in their community, and that will make their communities successful, and they will enjoy the benefits of having done that, and they'll bring innovation to their community and excitement and enthusiasm, and I think Russia will be a better place for that. Oh, here I made face. You can edit the faces out. Oh God, I'm a very emotive person. No, don't film that.
But that's great, because not all of the librarians are quite emotional for people, but they all have very interesting ideas, actually.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do. And it may be that when you're in a more traditional library, sometimes you don't suggest your ideas because you don't see how they fit. But as you get new spaces, then the new ideas come out.